Welcome back to Growth Without Referrals. Today, I'm joined by Andrés Tapia, founder of Andrés Tapia Strategy Group. Andrés has spent decades helping organizations navigate leadership challenges, transformation, disruption, and cultural alignment, especially during periods of uncertainty and change. What stood out to me about Andrés is that his work sits at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and human behavior, which becomes incredibly important when organizations are trying to grow in a predictable way. Andrés, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, Mark, a real pleasure to be here with you and your listeners.
Thank you. I'd love to start with your story. You spent years advising leaders and organizations through transformation, but I'm curious how someone ends up in that space in the first place. How did your journey into leadership consulting and organizational transformation begin?
Yeah, it was a circuitous route, as life will throw you curves in one way or the other, and you make the best of it, and you find out what you're good at and what resonates in unexpected ways. I started off as a journalist. I grew up in Lima, Peru, came up to the U.S. for college, Peruvian dad, American mom, so bilingual, bicultural. Started in journalism and did a lot of writing. The magazine that I worked for folded. Long story short, I ended up in corporate writing. Corporate writing became corporate training. Corporate training became organizational development and change, which was a strategic work. And then it became sort of transformation change, and that required working with leaders, because in the end, any organizational transformation requires leadership, either leadership to lead it or leadership is struggling to make the change that they want to make. And I found myself not only emerging as an unexpected strategist, and I do that quite at a meta level, but in that I found that I gained the confidence of leaders as a coach. And what started up informally, and I became an advisor to the top leaders in top companies around the world.
Excellent. And one thing I noticed in looking at your work is that you seem to be very focused on helping organizations stay aligned while everything around them is shifting. Right now, organizations are dealing with nonstop disruption, economic uncertainty, AI, workforce shifts, cultural tension, changing expectations. When you work with leaders today, what are the biggest challenges you see organizations struggling with right now?
Well, change has been the constant in the history of the business world and history. So we know that we just are in a very hyper accelerated way. And I think that's what leaders are struggling with, is the speed of change. Great leaders have always existed, and leadership exists not only to manage the existing, but to ensure that the organization or the nation or whatever kind of can flow and flex with the change. What is very destabilizing now is the fact that the change is so fast that whatever solution you came up with to say, oh, we're going to do this, by the time you start implementing it, the ground would have shifted and that doesn't work anymore. So, traditional ways of leading for change are just obsolete, because we cannot even set the stage for the new thing, because the new thing will have changed. So this is a very destabilizing, uncertain thing. So one of the things that leaders need to do is they need to know what to do when they don't know what to do. I mean, that's the essence of leadership, is to step up and meet the moment. But right now, even the best leaders don't know what to do when they don't know what to do. They can't even figure out the way forward. And so what I say to leaders right now, in a world off center, which is the destabilization and disruption, and with so many things out of your control, leader, and you mentioned all those things that are really out of individual leaders' control, there's one place that you have agency. There's one place that you can exert some control, and that you look in the mirror and it's yourself. That's the one place. So I say, in a world off center, start by centering yourself. Center yourself, and we'll talk about this later, when we talk about character, but there's work that we can do within ourselves so that when we meet a world that is in turmoil and it's tilted and not operating on a centered axis, if you enter that world in centered yourself, you will be able to know what to do when you don't know what to do in the moment. That is the core of the work that I'm doing today.
Excellent. Do you think most companies underestimate the human side of transformation?
completely, over and over is one of the big mistakes leaders make. You know, we have a lot of great leaders who are smart at whatever they're good at, you know, whether it's technology or engineering or healthcare or retail, and they know their business. And the best companies are able to deal with disruption in that they know that the marketplace, technology, consumer taste, competition has changed. And they're able to anticipate when the change is going to happen. And they're able to say, and therefore, we got to turn the ship this way, right? And they can be quite good at doing it because they know their business. But to your question, Mark, they underestimate the human element of it. It's one thing to come up with a really smart, grounded, research-based strategy that is accurate, that we're here and we now have to go this way. What they forget is that when they start going this way, their people have momentum to keep going the way they've always gone. You know, like, there's momentum as things have always been. And leaders get angry or frustrated or perplexed that their people have not done the turn with them. And this gap is not the fault of the people, it's the fault of the leaders. Because the leader's responsibility is to make sure that there's followership to the change. So there's too much of a disconnection between the brilliance of the strategy and the need to prepare your people to follow into the new course.
Absolutely. The theme of this show is growth without referrals, and the idea is pretty simple. A lot of firms initially grow through relationships, reputation, and referrals, and that works extremely well until growth becomes unpredictable. Do you see consulting firms struggling with predictability?
Well, this is an interesting sort of who is consulting whom. In other words, consultancies have always thrived in crisis situations or where things have changed, because that's when the structures of the organizations don't know how to adapt to the change. And therefore, they hire consultants who can provide that objective third-party view, but also they provide the strategic expertise to help make the change. Now, the shoe's in the other foot now, in that consultancies themselves are being disrupted, and so the ones that have helped others with disruption are being disrupted themselves. And so the landscape is changing. So consultancies, for example, let's just take AI, we're based on a model where you have early graduates from college who come in, get paid at a lot lower rate, but they're smart and they're very capable, and you pump them up with training, and you give them the brand, but you can pay them much lower, and you're able to sell high-end consulting with high value. I mean, the consultancies, are based not on an hourly rate, but on a value rate, and then able to then leverage their lower cost resources to then manage some healthy profits. But now with AI doing a lot of that analytical work that many of these entry-level college grads would do, that then you're just trying to remove a layer, and then it disrupts the economic model, because now businesses are going to say, well, okay, you're getting good margin, but you're paying people to do some of this analytical work. Now AI is doing it. In fact, not only are you using AI to do the work we used to pay a lot of money for, but we actually can use AI to do that work. And right now, consultancies are really struggling with a business model that really is starting to become obsolete. And so I think consultancies will be used, but the economic model, no one really knows what it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. And can organizations unintentionally become too dependent on founders' reputations?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a founder now. So I got to listen to whatever it is I'm going to say next here. But yeah, the brilliance of founders is that they have an idea that is unique or fresh. Many of them have charisma and a personality that generates followership. And that actually is important, because you need the new to break through the noise of whatever exists, right? That's why startups are always exciting, but when they talk about what they do, because they say, we are different in these ways. And the founder and the idea often sort of are interlinked, because that's sort of kind of how it goes, And so that's a great thing to get started, break through the noise. But once you break through the noise and you start to scale, which any startup really ultimately wants to be able to scale, then the business model has to change completely. And the the power and the attractiveness of the founder's charisma or unique idea is now, it was enough to get attention to break through, but it's not enough to now run an organization operationally, right? You got to figure out finance and technology and employee benefits and hiring. And this goes well beyond the power of the founder's vision and charisma. Now you got to run an enterprise. Now you have to scale. And many founders try to keep running this scaled organization that is successful due to their brilliance, but they keep trying to run it based on that initial model that works to break through. It does not work to sustain a scalable organization.
Absolutely. And one thing I appreciate about your approach is you don't seem to separate business performance from people. What happens when growth outpaces the culture?
Well, yeah, let's quickly address the part one about separating business and people. Big mistake, right? And then we can get to culture. One of the biggest headaches that leaders will say they have is their people. Because people are so complicated. Machines are not complicated. People are complicated and unpredictable. But their biggest part of their expenses are the salaries and benefits of their people. And so out of frustration about people are kind of hard to manage or hard to deal with, or they're expensive to deal with, or, giving them the training they need is expensive, then it starts to treat people as costs as opposed to treating people as assets. Because if you think about how we treat assets, whether it's our financial assets, we manage them carefully because we want to get the return on the investment. If we think about assets as machinery or technology, we treat it well because we want the machinery to run at optimal efficiency, right? But somehow something goes off in a lot of managers' brains when it comes to their people. So they, no one would accept a factory running at 60% efficiency. It's unacceptable. But then when we look at engagement surveys of people, and engagement has been proven, engagement meaning how much do I like the company I work for, how much am I willing to give it discretionary effort, and the higher the engagement on a scale of 0 to 100%, the higher it is, it's proven that you have better profits, better return on investment, less turnover and all those things. It brings in top line revenue and it manages your bottom line as well because you don't have all the turnover costs. And yet many companies are running at 40 to 60% engagement. So the biggest asset that you have, which is your people, is coming in disengaged into your organization and operating at the 60% or even lower of efficiency. And so from a pure business perspective, why are we paying so much attention only to the machinery or only to the financials and really making sure that those are running at 90% efficiency and allowing the biggest costs, our people, to run at 40 to 60% efficiency? So there is a strong link between taking care of your people and getting the financial results that everybody wants to get. So when it comes to the disconnect with culture, culture, put simply, is the collective behavior of a group of people within the organization, purpose of the organization. That's what it is. So if you're not taking care of your people and they're disengaged, and with that, they're angry, they're complaining, or they're not putting their best effort, or they're quitting, that creates a toxicity to the culture. And then culture becomes not only an individual thing, my individual people are dissatisfied, the collective environment is dissatisfied. And the culture then becomes either toxic or not engaging, not inspiring. But when you have a culture that is inspiring, then you can then have a very attractive workplace. But to have a culturally inspired culture, you need to have people that are inspired themselves. So those things have to go together.
Absolutely. And that's a great perspective. And I think you're spot on. And you mentioned earlier about AI, and I'd like to unpack that a little further. And I have a two-part question. What excites you about AI, but what concerns you about AI?
Yeah, and there's plenty to be concerned about and plenty to be excited about. On the excitement part, to be freed up from just whatever you're doing, things that are time intensive, repetitive, actually boring, not much value added in terms of the elevation of our own human creativity. If a machine can do it, great. We can get more done. We can do it faster. in many ways, we can do it more accurately. So I'm talking about research. I'm talking about certain types of coding, right? I'm talking about the ability to synthesize a lot of information because we have an information explosion that is just infinite almost. So AI being able to help us sort through that is wonderful. And I love the productivity that comes of it. What worries me about AI is both about creativity slash authorship and also the large scale impact it could have on the economy and employment. So let me start with that last one first. We always have to worry about any technology that's going to displace people's ability to earn their livings. I mean, that's just a humane thing to do. And what I'm going to say next is easier to say, but it doesn't help the people directly affected. The thing that's easier to say is that pretty much every technology that we've had has actually displaced people has actually ultimately generated more wealth and more jobs that were not even imaginable before, but because we outsourced the work to the machine, we're able to now do other things with our more elevated brains because, some neuroscientists say that we only use 30% of our brain capacity. And if we're occupied with really mundane, repetitive stuff, we're not able to access those higher parts of our brain. So what happens is we do, and that's why we have more invention, more creativity than ever before compared to 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years ago, because we're freed up to just rethink all these elevated things. We see all these technologies. So now, but what's not helpful about the statement I just made is that while that's the big picture, and I think there will be more jobs, I can't even imagine, it doesn't help the people immediately displaced. They can't wait 5, 10, 15, 20 years for the thing to settle out, if you will. And that's what worries me. And I think that's where corporations, nations, and government and schools need to really be more proactively caring of their populations and say, how do we make sure people can make the transition? How can we offer retraining or new training or something to bridge them into those new opportunities that we have to be paying attention to? Now, on the creativity side, I so worry about the dumbing down. I mean, on the one hand, I'm saying it can elevate our thinking. We can free up our CPUs at a higher level, but then people are relying so much on AI, not to research, but to write. And that's what really worries me. And obviously there's people like myself and others who are professional writers. So I'm glad that there's a tool that can help people get some foundational writing down, in terms of, organizing stuff like that. But when we outsource the writing, meaning the authorship, if you go to LinkedIn right now, there's a lot of people that sound the same. And they're writing for the first time, and they're excited. I always wanted to write, and now I'm writing. But you go through that, and you recognize the AI tells immediately. It's rife with, M dashes. It's rife with, one word sentences. It's rife with 1 or 2 sentence paragraphs, it's rife with fill in the blank. There's just all these tells. And then people that are using it without critical thinking are not noticing that they're being exposed as having their pieces authored by AI, as opposed to researched by AI or had the work checked by AI. That's fine. But the authorship, I mean, that if you're going to write and say something unique, many of these people have something important to say and they're doing it, but they have delegated way too much to AI and they're losing their authentic voice. I worry about.
Yes, and I agree too. I mean, when you say they're not using AI to really research or using it to actually write, they're losing that critical thinking. And
Exactly.
That is concerning, very concerning. You've worked with organizations through a lot of transformation efforts. Have you ever seen organizations focus so much on external growth that they're ignoring their internal readiness?
Well, yeah, I have seen too many companies implode because of that. And actually, I mean, I've seen big companies implode, but let's bring it down to the founder concept. Because in the startup and the entrepreneur, one of the biggest failures of a great idea, biggest reasons for a great idea that actually got off to a strong start was the inability to prepare for scalability. And so they focus on the growth, and the market was ready for the product. And in fact, the marketing was great, and the launch was great, and the charisma was great, and the excitement was real. And then the orders start coming in. And at first you're excited, until the orders come in at a rate that your system cannot produce. And this is very hard for the entrepreneur because you're excited. You want to make as much money as possible. The marketplace is finally responding after all that risk that you took. And now you're seeing your pipeline and you're seeing the sales and you're excited. The money's coming in. But I tell you, and this is the discipline that the entrepreneur needs. If you fail to deliver, it doesn't matter how many orders are in that pipeline and how much money that held. Failure to deliver will kill you. And that is a number one reason for entrepreneurships to fail. They did not prepare themselves for scale. And it goes to your question. They were prepared for the sales. They did it great. They did not prepare the internal. And entrepreneurs, I always counsel them, and I did this on counsel. Have a great idea. Start slow. And actually, many times people try to say, well, I'll invest in my infrastructure once I get the sales. But if you start getting the sales and you're not investing in infrastructure, then it cannot hold it. So don't think about investment just in the product and in the branding and the marketing and even in the hiring of key things, but think about your upfront investment being about your backbone, your technology backbone, your communications backbone, right? Your stack, your technology stack. So make sure so that when you start to now go to market and your sales start bringing in, you have a system that can hold it, right? And that is a big mistake. If you're waiting to invest in your infrastructure until you have your sales, you have to invest up to a certain point, of course, and not overinvest. But I see too many startups underinvest on the infrastructure and they break when those sales start through.
Great wisdom. And when you look ahead over the next few years, what do you think leadership and growth will require that maybe organizations aren't fully prepared for yet?
When I work with leaders, we talk business and business models and hard numbers and all those things on the one hand. On the other hand, to go back to the whole issue of culture and people, we talk about character. And I think character is the one thing that is really overlooked right now. And character often gets delegated. Well, that's sort of about spirituality or about religion or about values. And that's nice to have and by being a good person out in the world. But I believe that character is one of the most powerful leadership tools. And I don't like to talk about character as tools, but I'm going to for now just to take it away from the moralistic sense and say that this is the deeper your character, the more centered you will be and the more followership you will have. I have seen the circuit formula for me for leaders that have followership are those that have capability. They know their stuff and they're people of character. And let me get very specific, especially in the world of a lot of turmoil. Right now, the world there's a hard edge to the world right now. It's a scary world. It's a violent world. There's a lot of polarization. It's a very unkind world. And people there's a lot of mental health issues that then translate into business outcomes that are not good. Absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover, and just depression and all those things. And then the medical care costs that inflicts and that then drives up insurance rates for everybody. People being in pain and not feeling cared for has economic consequences, not only on them, but the organizations that they work for and the societies that we're part of. And I tell you right now, leaders, and I have a model called Character GPS. That's 7 character traits: authenticity, purpose, courage, resilience, kindness, humility, and gratitude. And these are hard-edged dimensions to strong leadership because leaders that show kindness and humility and gratitude in these times, coupled with their capabilities, that kindness, humility, and gratitude is like water in the desert in organizations and in teams and in people that are hungry for just the kind word, just to be seen and understood. Right. And I tell you, that is one of the greatest overlooked things in business today is we need to have character-based leaders that understand that it's the humane thing to do, but it's also the smart business thing to do.
Excellent. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate your perspective because you bring both the strategic side and the human side together, which honestly is where most growth conversations eventually lead anyway. For people who want to learn more about your work or Andrés Tapia Strategy Group, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, two ways. You can find me on LinkedIn, Andrés Tapia, and you can find out a lot about me there and connect with me directly there. And also my website is Andres, Andres, and then Andres Tapia Strategy Group.com.
Excellent. And for our audience, I will also be putting his contact information in the description of the podcast below.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. And also, when I talk about character, I have something branded called Character GPS. So when you look for me there, if you're interested in what I said about character, you'll find a lot of information there.
Absolutely. Great conversation. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
A real pleasure, Mark.